Hello, everybody. My name is Gilda Ross. I'm the Glenbard Student and Community Projects Coordinator. I am delighted that you could join us for tonight's program with the Glenbard Parent Series. You just saw the slide of all of our annual sponsors. I'm very pleased that one of our annual sponsors, the coordinator of that program, is with us tonight. That's the Glenbard Early Childhood Collaborative. Thank you to those people who make it possible, our many promotional partners. Most importantly, thank you for the gift of your time. We know that you are going to get some real good takeaways, things that you can put to use immediately. And that's what GPS strives to do, to inspire, to connect, to inform around the opportunities and the challenges of parenting young children, middle school children, high school and beyond. So glad that you are here. Please help us out by sharing this resource with others across the country, across the street. GPS is here for everyone in every community. We're all about healthy communities. So thank you for that. Quickly, I want to tell you about upcoming events so then we can get right into it. This week, we have another program on Thursday, the 29th. Dr. Lori DeSalutis will be talking about her book, Eyes Are Never Quiet. Similar to date, we're looking behind the behavior to see how we can see where the skill deficits are. Her book, again, is Eyes Are Never Quiet, Listening Behind the Behaviors of Kids. And then next week, we are going to be welcoming for the first time Donna Jackson Nakasawa. Her book is Girls on the Brink. She'll be talking about boys and girls on the brink, helping kids thrive in an era of increased anxiety, depression, and social media. Wednesday, the 6th at noon and 7 p.m. If you're in the area, join us at the College DuPage Hospitality and Culinary Building for a watch party with a conversation afterwards with their psychology staff. And that will take us into the next week. I'm excited about welcoming Ty Tashuro on the 13th, Wednesday. He'll be talking about his book, Awkward, The Science of Why We're Socially Awkward and Why That's Awesome. So circle your calendar for those events. There's one more to finish out the month. We're going to be welcoming Emily Klein. Her book is called The School of Hard Talks, talking about motivational interviewing for better conversations and stronger relationships on March 19th, noon and 7 p.m. So take a look at the website, circle the calendar, and once again, please share. Without further ado, Janine Woltman is the coordinator of the Glenbard Early Childhood Collaborative. It's my honor to introduce her, and she will be introducing our special guest today. So Janine, take it away.
Thank you so much, Gilda. I'm really happy to be here and really excited to introduce Dr. Lockhart. Dr. Louise Lockhart has over 15 years of experience as a pediatric psychologist. She specializes in working with clients who present with medical diagnoses and are seeking alternative solutions. She also serves as a parent coach for parents who have kids with ADHD, anxiety, and behavioral concerns. Dr. Lockhart has spoken nationally at schools, conferences, online podcasts, summits, and corporate workshops for topics about ADHD, executive functioning, and racism. We are delighted to welcome her to the Glenbard Parent Series today. Thank you, Dr. Lockhart.
Thank you, Janine. And I'm very happy to be back here with you today. And I'm going to be sharing my slides and talking with you all about this topic. And what we'll do is we'll leave the last 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes to discuss any questions that you all have and just rapid fire go through them. So, okay, make sure everything is good. We're set. Okay, awesome. So, we're going to be talking about parenting your child through misbehavior, meltdowns, and tantrums. And I always like to look at that in a way that it's kind of like in quotes when we think about misbehavior, because it's not always what it seems. So what we're going to discuss is defining a tantrum, defining a meltdown, and then some really practical strategies and even some scenarios to go through those things. Okay. All right, so then let's start with what's the difference. So the difference between a tantrum and a meltdown can be interesting because they both help a child communicate their thoughts and feelings. And the thing about tantrums is that's the one that we often know. And really, the difference between tantrums and meltdowns isn't something that I even understood as a mom to toddlers. My kids are now 11 and 13. But I didn't know there was really a difference. And I don't want us to get too wrapped up in the terms and everything, but there is a distinct difference and they do feel different when you're going through them. So tantrums are very common. They're healthy and developmentally appropriate. And when I do parent coaching with parents, they often don't want to hear this because they're like, well, I know that it's normal and it's developmentally appropriate, but it's still irritating. Well, yeah, all of those are true at the same time. So yes, you don't have to love them, but they are developmentally appropriate. And they can be expected at all ages. Yes, even adults have tantrums, and that is not developmentally appropriate. That is a sign of immaturity. But there are some things that we will see in terms of tantrum like behavior at all ages. It's also an attempt to communicate a need or a want. I want that red cup and you gave me the blue one. I don't want to go to sleep. I want to sleep in your bed. I don't want to do this. I want to do this. So it's really an attempt to communicate a need or a want. And then once the need is met, the behavior stops. Now, the issue with this is sometimes parents accidentally reinforce behaviors that lead to tantrums because you think, oh, if I just give in, then I can quiet them down. And yes, that does work. But what you're doing is you're positively reinforcing, which means you're increasing the likelihood that the behavior will happen again. The tantrum meltdowns are different. Meltdowns are really occurring due to sensory overload. It's when I feel hot, too tired, too hungry, I've eaten too much, not eaten enough. I have all these internal interoceptive needs, and all of those things are sensory overload. It's also reaction to feeling overwhelmed and overwhelmed by my feelings, overwhelmed by my choices, overwhelmed by the way that I feel physically in my body. And for lots of kids, this is brand new territory. Like, how do I communicate when I feel blank? Shame, isolation, embarrassment, loneliness, disappointment. Those are all really complicated emotions. And meltdowns can occur because of this feeling of overwhelm. It's also that it triggers the fight or flight response because they're trying to regulate the sensory input, which is why you'll see these big, huge meltdowns and explosions, and then they let it out, and then they want to cuddle with you like everything is okay because a volcanic explosion, the earthquake, tectonic plates, whatever happened. There's this explosion of tension that has been released, and now they're fine. So we have to pay attention to the central nervous system is also in this panic mode. They're in survival mode, so they're not even thinking through their behaviors and their decisions, and that's why you're seeing this. And so when you're looking at tantrums versus meltdowns, you can see they kind of feel different and they look different, but tantrums can also lead to meltdowns. So I'm mad that you gave me the red cup when I wanted the blue cup, and now I'm crying and crying and screaming and throwing myself on the floor. But now I've heated my body up, and now I'm in sensory overload and I'm feeling overwhelmed. So it's not always like this neat category. One can lead to the next. So tantrums, when we're thinking about them, it's really this uncontrolled burst of anger. And it's usually short in duration, usually about 3 to 5 minutes. That's the typical developmentally normal, appropriate kind of length of time. And the reasons can be the same as when we're looking at meltdowns, but they are learning that they are a person separate from their caregiver. They're learning individuation and autonomy, that I have needs and wants. I can speak more. Now I can express my needs. I don't have to go where you want me to go. You don't have to carry me around. You don't have to feed me. I am my own individual. And that's where that no phase comes in for a lot of toddlers. And the reasons can be a lot in terms of what we're looking at is that, the hunger, being overtired, not feeling well, being uncomfortable or in pain, frustration. So you see these behaviors, screaming, stomping, kicking, throwing themselves on the ground, which again can lead to a meltdown because now they're in overload. But 70% of kids 18 to 24 months of age have tantrums. So it is very common. And 75% of preschoolers 3 to 5 have tantrums. So if your preschooler or little toddler is having these Tantrums, it is common. It is not something that needs to be punished or totally eliminated even, but we want to help them learn to regulate. So it's something that is very common, but we don't have to be tortured by it every single day or have them tortured by it. So in younger kids, what often happens is they revert back to their first method of communication. So before they could speak, before they could communicate, before they could sign, whatever, however there's their means of communication, they use crying and whining. It was very effective in getting attention. So when I'm in a state of dysregulation, I'm going to go back to my previous method of communication. And for little kids, it's crying and whining. That's why it's so common. Emotionally healthy kids will have fewer tantrums as they get older and they recover faster. So as they learn that I have needs and wants, that I have words that I can use, that there are a variety of things that I can do in terms of tools in my tool basket, they will have fewer tantrums, or the duration is less and less intense over time. And it will also decrease as they learn more socially appropriate ways to deal with their emotions, using their words, using sign, using nonverbals, that there's other ways of expressing yourself when you're feeling disappointed or frustrated. Older kids and teens, a lot of times tantrums, although they're not as developmentally appropriate when you're older, it's more of a learned behavior. I've learned that I push enough, that if I complain enough, that if I whine and be snarky enough, that I get what I want. So that's more of a learned behavior. But there's often this sign of a gap between wants and a delay in meeting those needs when we see tantrums. And there's that buildup of frustration and disappointment. So it's about being aware of how they're feeling and aware of what my internal body state is doing during those times. And the thing is that a lot of toddlers and kids and teens, they hear no, don't, stop a lot from parents and adults. So a lot of that no, stop, don't can trigger these tantrums, because once again, I'm hearing no, don't do this, stop that, don't do that. And it's not that we're not going to say those things, but we want to change our parent language because they're primed to hearing the no and stop. And then they're ready and raring to have this tantrum. So there's alternatives, which we'll talk about in a moment. So emotions overwhelm logic centers in the brain. And if you've heard Dr. Bruce Perry or Dr. Tina Payne Bryson talk, they often speak about this in their books, where we have emotions and we have logical reasoning, and they're both processed in the brain, obviously. And so when emotions are triggered, positive or negative, they take over. And logic and logical reasoning take the back burner, and they no longer are there. It's like they're offline. And so when you say, well, you should know better than to blank, well, yeah, they might know better logically, but when they're feeling ashamed or disappointed or embarrassed or angry, they're not really thinking straight. They're emotionally reacting. So all of these things are things to really keep in mind. So the stress response, and this is if you're on Instagram and you want really good quality accounts to follow, this is definitely the one. Wholehearted School Counseling. She's a school counselor. I believe that's what she's still doing. But she has the best handouts. And this is one of my favorites. She has many, but this is one of my favorites because it really highlights the stress response in kids. And this is the stuff that you'll often see in tantrums, but you also see it in meltdowns, depending on the stress response. Because if you see a child being oppositional or demanding, it might be that they're in fight response. Or if they're procrastinating and ignoring the situation and avoiding it, maybe they're in flight response and running away from it. If they are zoned out and daydreaming, maybe they're in a freeze response. So again, we're always looking at what's driving the behavior, what's underneath the behavior, because so often we see the quote misbehavior and then we try to eliminate it and we don't really look at what's driving that. Let's speak to that need first so that we can address it. If you do have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat and the Q&A, and we'll be sure to get to as many questions as we can at the end. So thank you. Okay. So for meltdowns, again, it's about a reaction to feeling overwhelmed. And many of the triggers can be the same as what happens with tantrums, but a lot of that pain, fear, and unexpected changes happen, and it looks very similar to a panic attack due to this fear response. And it's this stuff that's going on inside of the body that they can't quite identify. So one of the ways to oh, wait, one more thing. And then it's this overstimulated brain. They are kind of like in sensory overload. And because many times these are new experiences, they don't know how to deal with it. Now, let me share this quick personal example because it just happened before we started. So I'm sitting down here. I just had a quick dinner before sitting down here. And we went over, like, getting prepped for this and everything. And then I turned off my camera and my mic, and then Janine is introducing me, and I find my heart racing. And I was like, why am I feeling nervous about this presentation? I rarely feel nervous before presentations. My kids always ask me, were you nervous? And I don't usually get nervous. And I'm like, am I feeling nervous? And then I realized, wait, I just had a Coca-Cola with my dinner, which I don't almost ever drink. Rarely do I drink caffeinated drinks. I don't drink, I'm not a coffee drinker. I know, surprise, surprise, is, I feel like everybody is, but I don't drink coffee. I don't have much caffeine. And so I think that's what my heart is doing. It's racing because of the caffeine. And so my mind was thinking I was nervous when really it's racing because of the caffeine. That's interoception, which we'll talk about in a moment. And interoception is being aware of your internal body state. But if I was a person who wasn't aware of this, and then I'm like, oh, I'm so nervous, I'm so nervous, I'm so nervous, and then I might start getting dizzy, I might start feeling on edge, I might start to hyperventilate, maybe feel nauseous, because that sensation of this sensory overload can be misinterpreted. And that is what happens to our kids. If I wasn't aware and made the connections that, oh, I drank caffeine and I don't usually do that, that's probably going to cause this reaction that makes me feel like I'm having a little panic or anxiety. So really, what's resolving a lot of this stuff with the sensory overload is changing or reducing the amount of sensory input. So I need to make sure I drink a bunch of water, because why the heck would I drink Coke at 6 o'clock in the evening, a couple hours before bedtime, or not a couple, but you know what I mean? So, and I'm probably speaking faster than normal, again, because of the caffeine. So being aware of that stuff is about changing or reducing the amount of sensory input. And that is exactly what would be helpful for our children as well. Because again, once their system is worn out, then they recover. So some common daily triggers for meltdowns tend to be all of these different areas. And many times what we're seeing is when kids have tags in clothes, tight clothing, grooming activities like brushing their hair, a non-preferred food that they're presented with. Maybe the environment is loud, or you're vacuuming, or the toilet is flushing. An environment that's very stimulating. There's a lot of loud kids, or a loud kind of environment going on. All of these things can trigger kids who are very sensory sensitive, for example. So this was the one that I was talking about earlier with the sensory. So on the left, we're pretty much familiar with the stuff on the left. Like these are our senses: seeing, hearing, speaking, tasting, feeling. But we also have a whole different sensory system as well that gives us information. The vestibular is our inner ear, which helps with balance. Proprioception is knowing where your limbs are in space. So knowing that you're going through a crowded room and not hitting and bumping into every desk. It's doing a handstand and knowing where my head is in relation to my feet. And then interoception is the one that I'm referring to a lot, because we see this often, especially with meltdowns. It's that being aware of your internal body state, like my heart racing, like my stomach, if I'm full, if I feel overheated or too cold. It's being aware of that. And that is very complicated for lots of kids to be aware of that stuff, because again, it's new sensations. And how do I have words for that particular sensation? So educating our kids about this interoception is so important, and education is really key when it comes to a lot of these things, because once a meltdown occurs, it kind of has to take its course. But the key is about preparing the child in advance and giving these when then scenarios. I notice that when we come home from school, you tend to get really upset over little things that we talk about, and it gets you really, really riled up. Do you notice that? Because I feel the same way after work. So when we come home from school, maybe we can think about having snacks or water or going to the park or taking a quick nap or whatever it is, like finding ways of coping and helping them be aware that these are my triggers and this is what I can do before the trigger. So it's a read about building them up. Now, there's times when you're going to see tantrums and meltdowns more often with certain diagnoses. Certain kids who are more, they're very neurodivergent in their thinking and in the way their brain is made up and in the way they process and interpret the world. And ADHD is one diagnosis that I really enjoy working with. And a lot of this is, it's about dysregulation. And ADHD is a dysregulation disorder. And that means that it's not just about attention, it's about their mood and their thoughts, their behaviors, and their emotions. Everything is kind of off kilter. And this has to do with executive functioning. And executive functioning relates to impulse control and emotional regulation, self monitoring, judgment, flexibility, frustration tolerance, and problem solving. And there's many more executive function skills, but these are the ones that I see that are most challenged when we're talking about tantrums, misbehavior, and meltdowns. And with ADHD, I see more often than not, it's more tantrums that we're going to see. It's dysregulation, but a lot of times I'm seeing more tantrums with this group. And there's a link in the research between ADHD and anger. There's a lot of concerns about delayed gratification because they're dysregulated, right? So they want to do this thing now. I wanted to watch TV now. The Wi-Fi needs to work now. I want my dessert now. And this delayed gratification mixed with their high energy and their dysregulation cause a lot of these big explosive tantrum behaviors. There's a lot of affective aggression as well, too. So this emotional aggression that occurs in about 50% of kids with ADHD. And it's these very big, unplanned emotions that we see, which is often why kids with ADHD are misdiagnosed with bipolar, because they seem to go from one end to the next. But bipolar is not as common as ADHD. And so when you see these things, it's probably more likely than not, more likely ADHD. And then Dr. William Dodson has done a lot of research, a lot of articles rather, on this concept called rejection sensitive dysphoria, RSD. And he says that in 90 to 90% or more of cases with people with ADHD, he finds that they're rejection sensitive. And so it's this real or perceived slight or insult. If I perceive that I'm being insulted, made fun of, humiliated, embarrassed, they either lash out in anger or pull in and withdraw, and you see a lot of depression. And so there's a lot of co-occurring diagnoses and conditions with ADHD because of that. And a lot of this is that dysregulation issue. So more than likely, you'll see a lot of tantrums with ADHD. So a lot of things I'm going to talk about are dealing with kids like ADHD, and these interventions and strategies do work with this population. Anxiety, this is another way that their brain is thinking and processing the world differently, processing themselves differently. So it can look like, it can start out as a stress response. It could be an overactive thought life. Maybe they're scanning the world and their environment for danger and threats. They're worried and concerned. Maybe they're thinking about feeling abandoned, left behind, feeling insignificant, but there's this constant fight or flight state of mind. And this often, when we see this, we see them in a variety of anxiety disorders, and most likely they're meltdowns. And these are some of the ones. OCD and PTSD aren't categorized in our diagnostic manual anymore as anxiety disorders, but they used to be, and they mimic a lot of anxiety type responses, and that's why I placed them here. But if you have a child or with any of these presenting issues, you're going to see a lot of probably meltdowns because of that overwhelmed stress response, because of that overstimulation and not being able to interpret what's going on inside of their minds and bodies. So I like this graphic because I think what ends up happening with a lot of our kiddos is they see the stuff in front of them that's going wrong, and that's all they focus on. and they can't focus on the rest of the stuff behind them that's really going amazingly right. But I also see this with parents, that we see that our kid is acting this way. They're ridiculous. They're really the 10th time that you're having this reaction. And we see these behaviors because they look like they're happening all the time. But we don't see all the times when we've delighted in our kids, when we've enjoyed their presence, their little giggle, their wonderful thing they did in the school play. Like we don't notice that because we see that and we think it's happening all the time. And sometimes we can blow it way out of proportion and not put it in perspective. So I think that's important because that's really in alignment with how I see a lot of quote misbehavior relates to us. And that's why I transitioned a lot of my practice after doing play therapy and therapy with kids for a very, very long time. A lot of my focus transitioned more to parent coaching because I saw how much better and how much quicker kids got when their parents were equipped and supported and helped to process some of those things. And triggers are a big one. Because when we see a child's misbehavior, we want to ask ourselves two important questions. Why am I being triggered? And what is my unmet need as a parent? And why this is important is because, last night I'm cooking for my family. We're playing music. I'm introducing my kids to songs from the 1900s, as they say, and we're giggling and laughing and they're being loud. And I think it's hilarious and we're enjoying our time. But there's other times when the same exact thing is happening and I feel irritated. I'm like, why are they being so loud? Why is this happening? And well, what's the difference? Well, last night I went for a walk with some of my team members in our neighborhood. It was a beautiful day here in San Antonio. Had a great lunch. I had some downtime. It was just an easy, chill day. And maybe another time I didn't have that. I didn't get to go for a walk. I didn't have maybe a good meal. Maybe I missed a meal. Didn't get rest. And so it's like that can be confusing for kids. Like, well, why is it that you were fine this day, but then we did the exact same thing and you weren't fine? We have to look at why am I being triggered? And then what is my unmet need? Because then we're putting in our children and it may have nothing to do with them. And a lot of times it doesn't have anything to do with them. So being honest with ourselves is important in those situations. So we become dysregulated because the brain dislikes uncertainty and unpredictability. And we want to feel safe, seen, and soothed. And Tina Payne Bryson talks a lot about that. And it's really about, am I safe? And does my nervous system, do I feel safe? Or am I under threat in this situation? And you'll see more dysregulation, like tantrums or meltdowns in those cases. Also, kids will act up when they feel unsafe physically or emotionally in their environment. Their neural circuits in their brain are looking to see, am I safe? Is this dangerous? Is this life-threatening? And it could be something as simple for us as like, a parent who's upset or always has this scowl on their face or has this tone when they're making statements. Like that kind of stuff, our children are scanning the environment to see, like, is this environment appropriate for me? Is it safe for me? And they want to handle an unfamiliar or overwhelming environment, and sometimes they'll act out. So these mirror neurons are what's involved in this process because we reflect the emotions, the tone, and the behaviors of others in our environment. And that's why your kid wakes up in a bad mood and now you're in a bad mood because you've mirrored each other, you've reflected one another. And so being aware of that and giving words to that are so important. Hey, I noticed you woke up today and you're not feeling it. Man, sometimes I wake up and I'm just in a bad mood. And I'm like, really? The day just started. You ever feel days like that? Does it ever feel like that sometimes? And being able to be aware of that, I think, is important. So that's a key thing. So when you mess up as a parent, repair with your child. Be able to tell them, like, don't be the cause of their fear, because whatever you resist will persist. And if you ignore those kinds of things and dismiss, it will continue to show up. So it's really about creating a story about what is going on in your mind, about reducing the scariness of the story, of helping them to feel safe if they feel unsafe because you yelled, because you walked away before the thing was resolved, because you were giving them a silent treatment. Whatever it is to be able to resolve that and repair. And that is a great way to break cycles that have been passed on, because many times, many of us were raised by parents who never took responsibility for when they messed up. So repair is a great way to bring regulation and to bring balance back into the home, especially when you have a dysregulated child. So things like make a good choice, you know better, it's not that bad, there's nothing to be upset about. A lot of those parent statements are coming from a very logic minded mindset. And again, when we make those statements and we speak logic into an emotional situation, they're not going to make it any better. They can send a child into this nuclear meltdown. So be aware of when you're speaking logic into emotion, it's not very effective. You have to speak calm emotion into an emotional situation. And we'll talk about what that looks like in a moment. So co-regulation is a precursor to self-regulation. So co-regulation is basically just introducing your calm into a situation, showing your child how to bring in the calm in their body, because self-regulation is an executive function skill. And their brain is growing until at least age 25, and they're trying to figure all this stuff out. So we cannot expect a little kid, even a toddler or a college age student, to know fully how to self-regulate, because especially if they struggle with ADHD, anxiety, any number of diagnoses or conditions, they're going to have a harder time regulating. The other thing to keep in mind is many times people get dragged into connecting through conflict. And there's some kids, like those who are very sensitive to rejection, those who are highly sensitive, those who are just dysregulated in general because of depression or OCD or anxiety or ADHD or autism spectrum disorder. They often seek stimulation. And sometimes that happens through picking a fight. And that getting dragged into that conflict can feel good sometimes to them. And if we can avoid that conditioned response, which is like, I only connect, we have this big explosion and then we watch a movie together and then we say, I'm sorry and everything's good. Like, be aware of that and bring that to their attention as well. So kids are hardwired for attention and power. And that's often what's behind dysregulation. They need positive attention every day, and they will engage in negative behaviors for attention. So the whining, the clinginess, the yelling, being this bad kid or playing in the sick role, they continue behaviors because they work for them. And so we also want to know that a child can trust that you are credible and you are consistent. And how are you going to respond even when they're not consistent? So a big part of the solution for this is really evaluating what executive function skills your child is lacking. Why do they continue to have these reactions? And teach them the skills they need in each of these areas. And I'll show you what that looks like in the next slide. And give them opportunities to practice that. So trying to understand the root of the feeling, because understanding that external behaviors are an expression of the child's inner experience. Okay. All external behaviors are an expression of the child's inner experience. And we have to be a detective to figure out what that experience is. And that is really hard to do. Okay. So there are three main areas that I see a lot. There's a lot, but these are the ones that I see come up over and over again when we are looking at tantrums and meltdowns. Flexibility tends to be one. A lot of these kids who have these concerns are very sticky, they're very inflexible, and they don't adapt very well to situations. You know, you tell them, they say something like, you said we can go to the pool on Saturday. Well, yeah, I know, but that's when the weather was good. And now it's like hailing and thunderstorming and lightning. We can get electrocuted if we go to the pool. But you said, like, they get stuck in the promise of this thing that now we can't do. And this shifting ideas mentally, behaviorally, psychologically, they get really stuck. So the solution is to help them to get unstuck, help them to reboot. And that could be like, hey, it sounds like we need a reset. Let's walk away and come back. Let's take a break. Label the emotion. You know what? I know you're disappointed that we can't go to the pool. Oh, I know. I get so disappointed when things don't work out as planned. We can even plan for the future. Hey, let's plan to go to the pool, but what if the weather is not great? What can we do instead? Like helping them think flexibly. and integrating flexibility into storytelling and schoolwork, reading books about flexibility. So that is a real key. It's about getting unstuck, practicing, making plans, and practice what happens if the plans don't work out. What if you go to the birthday party and you don't see anybody that you know? What if you go and try out for the team and it doesn't work out like you planned? What if you go and it does work out exactly as planned? So don't just look at the doom and gloom scenarios, also think of what can go right too. Problem solving is another big one that I see often, and a lot of the research points to a lot of kids who have oppositional behaviors or defiance, that kind of stuff. What it really is a lack of problem solving. They just see the problem and they don't know how to solve it. They don't know how to find solutions. So teaching them how to find solutions to their problem it's very empowering. So helping them to say what the problem is, thinking of those solutions, and talking about the ones they've already tried, because the reason why they tried them is because they thought it was a good solution. So when you were in class and you felt really angry at your classmate, you just smacked him. And that felt like a good solution. He annoyed me, I smacked him. Okay, well, that's one way to solve a problem, but it may not be the best way. What are some other ways? You can walk away, you can tell him to stop, you could tell the teacher, you could just do nothing. Like there's many ways. And then what's good and bad about each good and bad solution? So smacking somebody might feel great because you're letting out all the, tension, and it's a good release, right? Because that's that sensory overload again. But what's another way to get that release out? So finding something that's similar, but that's more adaptive can be helpful. So what's another way you can let out that tension rather than hitting? And then you can pick a different solution and see if it worked. If it didn't, okay, let's try something else. So really not fixing it for them, not rescuing them, but teaching them how to solve their own problems. And then self-control. Self-control is really related to all this stuff because you're teaching them, you're basically, if you're resetting, if you're looking at problem solving, you're teaching them how to control their reactions and responses to things so they could be intentional. And that way they can see, okay, I was frustrated, which is why I did this. I could do something different. Now, is this hard? Definitely. It definitely is hard. Okay. But what we're really doing when we parent differently is we are changing our family lineage, because it's like we are Spider-Man and we're holding back this bus full of zombies trying to wreak havoc on our child who's just doot crossing the street, not even paying attention to all the work that we're doing, all the books that we're reading, the parent coaching that you're getting, the therapy that you're doing, the work that you're doing on yourself. And they have no clue. But you're trying to change your family narrative. And it's a lot of work because we just get triggered. And that's a normal response to things because there's so much to undo, some more than others, and some situations more than others. So, what you're doing when you're parenting differently is you're trying to basically change your family history so that you're not pouring more stuff onto your child and that their life can be different and you can change your future generations. So, it is hard work. So, some regulation reminders. Don't take their behaviors personally. It is about them. It's not about you. When they're having a struggle, even if it is something that you feel like it's ruining your day, it is about them. How can we help them? The next thing is adjust your parent mindset. You can do everything right as a parent, and your kid may still have a tantrum or a meltdown. Perfect parenting doesn't lead to perfect kids. Okay. And then perfect parenting is not the standard that we should aim for. The other thing is that we want to always identify and meet the real need or function behind and underneath the observed behavior. What is the real need? What is the real function of this behavior? Are they hot? Are they overstimulated? Are they hungry? And then meet their needs, not necessarily wants, but meet the need. What is the real need? Help them to understand what that real need is, and then give them the skills they need to regulate. So during calm states, reinforce that for them, teach them those things. So then when the meltdown is happening, they know what to do about it. And then most importantly, remain connected, calm and present, because when a child has these behaviors, the last thing we want to do as parents, for most of us, is to connect. We want to run away because our nervous system is getting triggered and we don't want to be around stuff that makes us feel bad. Of course not. And so, but remaining connected, we don't want to communicate to our child that your behavior, your emotions, your problems are too much for me. Because if they're too much for you as a grown up, what am I supposed to do with them? Is that easier said than done? Yes, absolutely. It is, but it is so important because it's something that we're doing to really build up our kids. So pay attention to the need, the skill, and the habit. What is the child's need? What is the skill they're lacking? What is the habit? And the habit is something that I interjected in here because the habit is what happens when they practice and practice and practice and practice. When you practice something, you get really good at it. And so if you practice having the tantrum every time you don't get your way, you get really good at that. That becomes your automatic go-to response. And then remind yourself, I am helping them develop skills. I am helping them build habits. That is the mantra you can tell yourself. I'm helping them develop skills. I'm helping them build habits. It's all skill building. It's all habit forming. Okay, we have a few minutes left before we open up for questions. So please put your questions in the Q&A or the chat and we'll get to them in a few minutes. All right, so some helpful scripts that you can use. So your child is feeling frustrated. Of course you feel frustrated. This situation is super frustrating. I am here to help us work it out together. Discomfort. Lots of people feel uncomfortable. It's okay to feel uncomfortable when things are so uncertain. If it's a safety issue, it's our job as parents to keep you safe. You are safe. I got you. If something feels unfair, I know it feels unfair. That is hard to feel that way. Now, again, these are just guidelines. You don't have to say it like verbatim. Do it based on your personality, the situation, your child's personality, their age. These are just, in general, what I'm trying to get you to think about is how to change your parent mindset and how to make sure that you're communicating in a way that says, I hear you, I see you, I get you. Kids want to feel understood and they want to feel like you're in alignment with what they're going through, even if you don't agree. And a thing that I want you to keep in mind too is be curious. Be curious about what they're going through. Be curious, even if they're making a statement that you think is so ridiculous. Like, I don't think, why do parents have to decide my bedtime? Why do you get to say what time I go to bed? You could say, that is a very good question. Why do adults get to decide when kids go to bed? And be curious, like give it back to them and then have a discussion about it. And so even if something seems like really outlandish, that curiosity can help them feel like, oh, my parent gets me, they hear me, they see me. That's a good thing. And then some helpful self scripts for you. Things that you can say to yourself when you're feeling your big emotions, when you're feeling overwhelmed, reminding yourself it's not you versus your child, it's you and your child versus the problem. What is the real problem here? I heard this from Jay Shetty several months ago, years ago. I don't remember how long now, but it just always stood out to me. We're not in battle with our child. And I think it's important to communicate to them that you are too important to me for us to have this fight, for me to have this fight with you. Me staying connected with you is more important than winning this battle. That I'm not choosing my battles because you are more important than the battle. And so it's all of that kind of mindset to be able to communicate, whether you communicate in words or in your actions. So this is my contact information. You can find me on Instagram at dr.annlouise.lockhart or at Facebook at A New Day, Pediatric Psychology. We offer parent coaching and if you're anywhere in the world, and then we offer therapy if you are in the state of Texas. And my team and I offer all of that. So, but parent coaching, if that is something you just need guidance, education, support, help, you need one session or many sessions. I've seen parents anywhere from one time to several years. So that is an option available to you as well. So don't do this alone. Reach out if you do need help at anewdaysa.com. And then I also have courses available on my website for a variety of concerns. There's a parent membership where you meet for group parent coaching. So we have a variety of places and areas where you can get further support. Okay, let's open it up for Q&A.
Once again, I find myself with 10 pages of notes here. So that's great. So one of the things that I know parents are concerned about, in that moment when you are pulled in and you know this stuff and you cannot help yourself, what do I do in that moment? And when I can't, when I
Yes.
don't realize it's not about me, what do I do?
Yes, that is so hard to do. And I think a big part of it is going back to that self-compassion and knowing that your system is getting overstimulated and dysregulated. You're going into this threat response because you feel threatened, you feel offended, you feel embarrassed, you feel annoyed. And so you're going to have a response because you have been triggered. So I think it's having that awareness and that understanding of yourself, and then saying, of course, I'm having a reaction to my child screaming in my face. Anybody would have that reaction. And then you take your breath and say, okay, 70% of toddlers experience this. This is normal, irritating and so normal. And you take that breath, and that breath will calm your nervous system. So that way you're not having such a big reaction. And then looking at taking action. So if you have a partner, tag team, you take a break, go for a walk, whatever it is, but you don't always have to respond in the moment. Sometimes you need to take a break, you reboot, you reset, and then give yourself some self-compassion in the process.
So what's your mantra when you're in that, when you've been in that moment? Because we've all been in that moment. What is the mantra for yourself?
For me personally, so I think for me, a lot of times, and I tell this, my husband is like, okay, this is normal. This is common. Kids can be unreasonable. I can get through this. This won't last forever. Those are some of the ones that I do, even as preteens and teens. It's like, wow, this is unbelievable. I cannot believe, no, this is a common response. This is normal. I can get through this. And then not always feeling compelled to always have to respond in the moment to the situation. You don't have to respond immediately. So I think sometimes as parents, you think, oh, if I don't say something now, they'll never learn their lesson. Well, they're not going to learn their lesson in the middle of the tantrum and the meltdown because their logical reasoning is offline. So you can't make a teachable moment out of the situation. You got to take a beat and take a pause too.
Yeah. I think that's really so key. Just know that this is not the time for logic. It's impossible if they're. And I think about Bruce Perry too. It's impossible for them to access that part of the brain, figure out the basic needs. How can we get there first? I love that. You have a
Yes.
question here. Some recommendations to get your partner on board with the tools and the tips provided.
Yes, that's a great question. So that's something that I work a lot with is I help parents get on the same page. And sometimes you might need to enlist the help of a parent coach, someone that gels with the two of you in with your personality. Because what you don't want to do is basically tell your husband, well, I know what I need to do. I just need to school you to get on the same page because that feels very unequal. And what I find is that a lot of times, especially husbands, they don't appreciate that when they hear that because it makes them feel like less of a parent and it feels judgy. So, really saying that, hey, making it inclusive, I want us to be on the same page, use very inclusive language in terms of that. I want to grow with you in our parenting journey, and I want us to feel better equipped as we work and interact with our kids. Can we get on board together? And so using a lot of that we language that is not like, I need you to get on board with me because I know what I'm doing and you don't. Like we want to stay away from that.
Good. Janine's got a question. You mentioned the need impact of repair. What are some examples of what that might look like or sound like, and maybe how it might look different as a parent of a toddler, or preschooler, or older child?
So the repair, um, I think it really depends on their language level and their understanding. And so, it could be, it's like nonverbal. It could be softening your approach, your face, your body language, and just embracing. Maybe you've yelled and you've lost it with your kid and now you want to repair. And it's just, just like when you speak to babies, they don't fully understand, but they can get it because that's that mirror neurons that are being impacted. So then you can say, Mommy is so, so sorry for yelling at you. and then just embracing. And that's where that co-regulation, that repairing can come in. If it's a child that's older and understands, you can express that, when I was feeling tired and frustrated, and then you came and you smacked me on the face, I I just started yelling. And even though I was upset, that is not the way to deal with that. Mommy is so sorry. Daddy is so sorry. Um, and that way you're not justifying why you did it, but you're making connections between this was the trigger, this was my response, and this was not the way to deal with it. Because what you're doing is you're modeling for them. This is the internal response. And this is actually something that works really well with kids on the spectrum, kids with ADHD, kids with anxiety, because you want them to be aware of their interoceptive response. When I was feeling angry, when I was feeling frustrated, when I was feeling hungry, when I didn't get enough sleep, I responded this way, but I could have responded that way instead. And you're helping them build connections between why we do what we do, but we can do something different. It's such an important thing to do.
Now, when you've worked with a family, you've started coaching them. They're really understanding this about calming themselves, because if you're not calm, you can't possibly calm a child down. And I love what you said about how they'll see that we're out of control and how frightening that might be. So when a parent is starting to get this, what do you think the biggest mistake is that they make?
Good question. I think what I see a lot is projecting blame onto their child. Well, I did this because you made me yell. I did this because daddy was getting on my last nerve. I did this because you interrupted our conversation. Like it becomes, it's that you and that blaming and that projection, and it's not taking the responsibility for themselves. And it's the same thing that we get on kids about. Well, why did you blame so and so for doing it? You should have, well, he made me hit him. He should have done, well, no, why didn't you do it? And so, but we tend to do that too. So I think that's the biggest mistake, is that I think when parents are trying to learn that kind of calm regulation, they tend to diffuse responsibility and push it onto their kids. Um, it's really easy to do. And I have to keep myself in check. My husband and I keep ourselves in check about that too. We're like, well, yeah, of course we're in a bad mood this morning because, he decided to wake up on the wrong side of the bed. Well, no, we get to decide. We get to set our environment. We don't let our kids set at that stage for that. We get to set that stage. Um, so I think that's the biggest mistake, but it's very common and it's very easy to do.
It's surprising how many parents of teenagers we have listening tonight. So
Oh,
what do you
really?
think? Yeah, very interesting. So talk just a little bit about what would you, if you had made this, if this chat was specifically for our teenage parents, what might you have added, or what would you have said differently?
I really think a lot of this stuff applies to all ages. I think the difference maybe, well, no, because a lot of times teenagers think their parents talk too much. So I wouldn't add too much language. A lot of the co-regulation is not so much in terms of what you say, but it's your presence. Because after a while, they just tune you out when you talk too much. And I think that's one of the big mistakes I see parents of teens do, is they overtalk. They get into this big old session of trying to like over talk and have this teachable moment, and man, teens cannot stand that. They want to feel understood, and I think that's the big thing that I would do differently if I was just presenting just to parents of teens, is to really seek to understand them and really get to the foundation of their behavior, and really talk to the real need. Talk to the real need. So whatever they're doing, they're sneaking screen time, sneaking out of the house, not doing their homework. It's super easy to say no phone for a week. Don't do that. Get away from that. That's like the lamest really excuse in terms of punishment. Don't do that. Just stick to what drove them to not do their homework. Why are they sneaking screen time? Why are they not turning in their homework? Like, speak to that real need and come with a sense of compassion and understanding. And I think that makes such a big deal. That's what teens really want. Think that would be the big thing, is I would focus a lot more on that compassion and that understanding, really understanding them and just sitting with them in that mess, helping them feel heard. That's a big thing I hear from a lot of teens that I work with.
And if you were speaking to the parent of a middle schooler, would that shift in any way, shape, or form?
No, I think it'd be very much the same. I think that a lot of that shifting and changes, especially because middle school is brutal for a lot of people. It's really helping them feel like I see you, I hear you. And I think a big part that I probably would add more is a lot more empathy. So when they're talking about, gosh, today was really hard, and so there was drama in the chat, in the chat, and if we're like, oh, whatever, that you people are always so dramatic at your age, what back when my day, like, don't do that. Like, to say, really, what happened? And it's really about being curious. I would emphasize a lot more the curiosity and really seeking to understand them in that moment, and listening and being present. Like, that is what middle schoolers really want, is for their parent to get them and not dismiss them in their little drama. It's important to them. Being included is important to them. And we have to remember what it was like and how much harder it is now.
I really picked up on when you said about naming the emotions. And you said in the calm moments, teaching the skill. And I love what you said about the storytelling. So give us an example of how we could share a skill in a story.
Hmm. Well, we could do it through books, depending on the child's age. So if they're littler, there's books where you can read about that. There's a series of books by Brian Smith. You can get them on Amazon, and it's really executive function skills. And I love it because he talks about like impulse control and frustration tolerance and flexibility, and it uses examples of kids. In that situation of being told no or whatever. So I think you can do it a lot through books for the younger ones. But it can also be done through like watching movies and having discussions about the villain, why the villain continued to be a villain, or the good guy, why the villain became a good guy. So I think you can use a lot of that stuff in terms of flexible thinking, frustration tolerance, emotional regulation. Or you can even talk about it in your experiences. Man, I was driving home from work today and the traffic was terrible. And I saw this dude cut off another dude, and then they were like racing along the freeway. And I'm like, man, get a grip.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So what do you think that someone can do when someone gets cut off in traffic? I mean,
Exactly.
yeah, one way is to flip them off, but what is something else you can do instead? And that could be for like the older kids. So creating scenarios that are true or not, but
Yeah.
are real life type examples to help them think through problem solving. When something happens, yeah, I could do this, which is pretty dangerous, or I have many other options. Oh, they could just have ignored them. They could turn up the volume and just pretend like they're not there. They can apologize if they can see them. They can hang back and take the exit. Like, there's many other things that you can do in situations like that and engage them in that discussion.
Mm-hmm. You've been in practice for a while. Post COVID, what have you seen?
Oh, I've seen a spike in anxiety across the ages, but especially starting younger. Lots of anxiety, especially social anxiety and school and test anxiety. It's
Mhm.
like skyrocketed.
Hmm.
I'm seeing a lot more behavioral concerns that are hard to treat,
Mhm.
like
Hmm.
kids who are like getting expelled from preschool and daycare. Um, and we're working with them in therapy, and it is just they're resistant to change. It is so much harder to treat these kinds of concerns. So I'm seeing a lot of that, especially with 4-year-olds. And
Mhm.
then jumping up to the teenage 14, 15-year-olds.
Interesting.
So I think those are the ones that I'm seeing most often. I'm seeing a lot of those things, the anxiety and the behavioral stuff.
Let's say a word or two about social media.
Social media, I think people so often see it as all bad, and I think that there's lots of good that comes from it. I mean, we discovered each other because of social media. I've gotten a lot of great opportunities because of social media. I think it can be a really good thing, but I think that as parents, if your child is on a device or screens, you have to be diligent about what you allow them to be on. Social media is not meant for kids under 13. I think 13 is a little young anyway.
Mhm.
Social media is meant for a mature brain who knows how to deal with disappointment and insults and trolls and not getting all wrapped up in comparing themselves, because it's hard enough when you're an adult. So I think that if you're going to allow your kids to be on screens, you need to have parental controls and apps that monitor that. And you have to have parameters around how much screen time they have. So my kids are on computer, they have their a cell phone, but I monitor it with my phone in terms of when the phone wakes up, when the phone goes to sleep, and how many hours a day they have access and what they have access to. So I think we also have to be smart about it, so that we know what our kids are on and how much access they have to that. That is super, super important, because too much screen time and too much media can lead to depression, body image issues, suicide, anxiety, envy, comparison that's unnecessary.
Beautiful. Here's our last question. Are there Instagram accounts you follow that share similar tips and content?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. So I would say the OT Butterfly is one. That's Laura Pettix, the one who talks a lot about neurodivergent kiddos. Let's see, um, Dr. Lisa Pressman, I like. She, what is her, is it Seeds of Learning?
Well, I know the new one is, 5 principles of parenting, and coming in August next year, Lisa
Yes.
Pressman. So check her out.
Yes, but I think her account is called Seeds of Learning, but no, that might be wrong. Tara Sumter is another one. She's a speech and language pathologist, and she does a lot with executive function. So if you want to really dive deep, she's a great one. Those are the ones that are off the top of my head that I really like. But if you go to my account at dr.annlouise.lockhart, you'll see a lot of the people that I follow that are professional accounts, and they'll give you a good idea of some of those. I really believe in looking at a variety of perspectives, because I think it's good to have that, to kind of get that shift in perspective, especially based on your kid's age.
Well, we have loved your perspective tonight. What a
Thank
treat
you.
to spend the day with you in the middle of a storm. Thank you so much. No one has left, so that is a great sign. Dr. Lockhart, this is the point where we go hug our kids. So we are going to go hug our kids right now.
Yes,
Thank you
yes,
so much, everybody. Thank
yes, no problem.
you.
Thank you,
Thanks, Janine.
everyone.
See you next time. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, you've got 2 questions in the Q&A, and you've got a couple in the chat. Let's start with the chat. What do you say? Okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Do your suggestions apply to neurodivergent children?
Yes, because the ones that I addressed with ADHD and anxiety and autism, those are all diagnoses that are typically neurodivergent. OCD, PTSD, all of that are ways that the brain are not operating like a neurotypical brain would. So yes, and it depends, because it's not a cookie cutter approach, but yes, they absolutely apply to that. Those are the kids that I typically I work with. So yes.
Okay. I got tears in my eyes with that Superman cartoon. Can you say more about how we as parents can break the cycle of something we don't want to pass on to our children?
Oh my gosh, such a great question. I mean, where do I even start with that? I mean, I think a big part of that is by identifying your triggers. I think that's a huge one, because I find that when we as parents are triggered by certain things, we might think that that's ridiculous. Why am I being triggered by that? And many times that comes from our background, that comes from those things that we're trying to hold back, because we're trying to ignore or move past or work through. And so I think it's about building that awareness of why we feel triggered by certain things, why certain memories come up for us, and doing our own work. So whether that's working with a parent coach, with your own therapist, a support group, with your church, synagogue, I mean, like really helping working through that, I think is really important, because that's how you break cycles, and that's how you don't pass things on to your kids. Great question.
You've got another question here. Is there a suggestion for single parent navigating a neurodivergent child's needs and a sibling who is NT? There you go.
Yeah. Yes, that's a really important question, because what I find is whenever I work with families who has a child has ADHD or autism or something that is very challenging for the family, and then you have a child who's neurotypical, many times a neurotypical child feels like, well, you're playing favorites, or they get away with everything, or if I did that, I would get in trouble, and it feels very unfair. And one of the things that I think is very important is to educate the neurotypical kid about how their brain works, and also educate them on how their siblings' brain works. So we're not making excuses here, and we're not trying to make them like a parentified kid where they're taking care of their sibling. It's about educating them on their brain and educating them on their siblings' brain so that they understand that brains are different. And this is why this is easy for you, and this is why this might be hard for your sibling. And so how can we support you so that you don't feel like things are unfair? And how can we also support your siblings so that they can feel equipped to handle these things? What can we do for you when you feel overwhelmed by what's going on in the house? So it's really, for me, a lot of it is starting out by educating and helping them understand how their brain works. I have a good friend who wrote a book about neurodivergent brains. I don't know if I have it here, but it's a kid's book
Deb Reber?
about. So, say it again.
Deb Reber? Is it Debbie
No,
Reber?
no, not her, not her, but Laura Pettix, Petix. Laura Pettix. She wrote a book, a kid's book about neurodivergence. I believe that's what it's called. And it's really good because her kid is as is she, and it's really talking about what that brain means. What does that mean to have a brain that works that way? And I think that educating them is a very powerful way to go about that so they have a better understanding.
Excellent. Here's a question. This is a parenting seminar, but family systems are important, of course. Any suggestions when mom or dad has a hard time regulating, how to help the whole family learn these tips when parents are
Yes.
struggling with anxiety and ADHD?
Yes. That's such an important thing because of that co-regulation piece that I talked about. Because if your child is having a moment and you are feeling like you're reacting, well, it's because your nervous system is reacting to the dysregulation, right? So if something was happening, like, there's a bunch of construction going on in San Antonio, like it has been for like 20 years. So so when I go through certain parts of town and I get to my destination, I'm like, oh my gosh, I already feel worn out. Well, why is it? Well, because there's like no shoulder and it's like traffic and there's like, bumps on the road and the one small error. And it's like, it's a lot versus if I'm driving in the country, right? My nervous system is getting overstimulated in certain situations, which is why I feel more dysregulated. It's the same thing when you have a child that you feel like, man, they are messing up my nervous system and my peace. So a big part of that is to try to center yourself and figure out what is it that you need. Exercise is huge. And it doesn't have to be like working out and lifting weights. It doesn't have to be hardcore, but going for a walk, getting your heart rate up, yoga, breathing exercises to calm that nervous system, journaling, talking to a friend, therapy, tag teaming with your partner, taking a night out, taking a weekend away. Like there's a variety of things based on what it is that your nervous system needs. But a big part of it, especially if you have struggles with anxiety or ADHD or other things like that, then yes, your nervous system is going to be more taxed. And that is why you have a harder time with it. So it's about taking care of yourself and exercising some self-compassion. And a big part of it is telling yourself, okay, I know I'm having a hard time because this is a hard situation. Like just be honest with yourself. Like, yeah, this is annoying. Having a tantrum every night over dumb stuff is annoying. So why I'm having a reaction to it is because it is normal to have a reaction to this stuff. So normalize it. Like you don't have to be all like, oh, it's okay. Like I need to enjoy every moment. No, sometimes you don't enjoy the moments, and that's okay.
Here's a question about this child shuts down completely, and you have no clue what just happened, but they're not talking to you. Get role play with us?
Yes. Any particular age? Like are we talking about a certain age?
8 years old.
8? Okay. So if you have a child who shut down and you were like, what the heck just happened? What was the trigger? What I would say is kind of take a step, kind of a beat, and just say, okay, really like scan the environment, take a pause. You don't have to react to every situation right away. And you can say it to yourself, okay, what just happened that they shut down and they stopped talking to me? And you could even say it out loud if the child is in your presence, because again, what you're trying to teach your child is to have some kind of introspection and self-talk and self-monitoring. Those are all executive function skills, because that builds self-awareness and that builds emotional intelligence. So you can say something like, huh, that's interesting. Something just happened and I sensed a shift. Like I felt kind of strange, and I see that it looks like you just shut down. Like just saying that out loud can sometimes build that awareness, because you're mirroring this curiosity, but you're not judging, you're not penalizing, you're not accusing, you're not telling them, fix your face. You're just saying, I'm aware. There was a shift that just happened. It's amazing and remarkable how well that works, because then the child can be like, well, no, it's because blah, 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 blah. You just looked at me funny, because maybe they are rejection sensitive. Or, you just had a tone and you told me about my tone. What's up with that? And maybe now they're revealing. So it's really about being curious and taking a pause and slowing it down, and then speaking that self-talk out loud.
I love that. And when you said you have a child who's rejection sensitive, so what's another suggestion in that case when they're not having that meltdown?
Yes. So if they're not rejection sensitive, sorry.
They are rejection sensitive. Now, I just love where you're going with that. So now you have this child who's rejection sensitive. How best to help? Not in that moment of a meltdown.
Right. Not in the moment of the meltdown, because once the meltdown happens, you have to let it take its course, right? But if you see that the kid is maybe shut down and they're not really having this big explosive meltdown, and they're not completely shut down because maybe now they're curious about what you're saying, then maybe you can go a step further and say, you know what? I notice that sometimes if I have a tone or if my voice is kind of harsh, I notice that kind of makes you feel a kind of way. Am I getting that right? Like, you know what? I experience that sometimes at work too. When my boss says things to me in a certain way, and then I feel like, dude, so that totally makes sense to me. So
love that.
If that's what's happening, I really apologize for that. I have to be more aware of my tone, because I'm not always aware of my tone. And so taking responsibility, I think that's a big thing for a lot of parents. That's how, like what the individual asked earlier about breaking cycles. A lot of us, as when we were kids, we didn't get parents who apologized. And so that in of itself can be a big cycle breaker, because it's about an adult actually admitting that they're wrong, an adult being introspective and taking responsibility and apologizing. The adults aren't always right. We don't always make good choices. And so that can be a really great way to break cycles, and to also speak your thoughts out loud, to model for your kids how to speak those thoughts out loud.
Yeah. That is so
It's
key,
really
that
powerful.
modeling. Yeah.
That modeling
Wonderful.
is really important.
Love that. How do I react to my daughter when she's having a tantrum and I want to hold my boundary and continue to say no to the ask, but she's almost mocking me. She says to hide a smile, she tries to hide a smile or begin smirking, like she knows she's triggering me into a blow up.
Those are the worst. Those are the worst, because you feel like this child is mocking me. She knows exactly what she's doing, and it feels like manipulation. But it's a learned response, because they know that if I push enough, if I have this tantrum long enough, that this parent always gives in. So I have to hold my ground. So it becomes like this battle, right? So I think it's really about, again, you don't have to respond right immediately in that moment. You have to take a little pause and recognize, wow, I'm having all these feelings because I feel like this little child is manipulating the situation. That feels bad to me. I do not like the way that feels. Okay, so how am I going to deal with the situation? I think that's where you change your parent language, because again, no, don't stop. Kids hear that a lot. So that is often triggering for tantrums for a lot of kids. So I'm not saying to give in to your kids, but saying to use those words less. So for example, a child, and again, once the tantrum happens, there's very little you're going to do to stop it in the moment, because it can morph into a meltdown. But it's about holding the boundary. I think exactly what you're saying is correct. You hold the boundary,
but it's about the way you reduce and the intensity and the frequency of meltdowns and tantrums is what you do before they happen. Because once they happen, they run their course. And that's the hard part. So one of the things that you can practice with this child, for example, is if she's asking for something, for example, I want ice cream for dinner. Oh, you want ice cream for dinner? Yeah. So can I have it? Oh, you really want ice cream for dinner? Mm-hmm. Ice cream for dinner. Like, just pause, like, give it back and see where she goes with that. If she continues to insist, you match her emotions and her tone, but in a way that's positive and not punitive. Ooh, you are really determined to have ice cream for dinner. Okay, so here's what we can do. We're going to have our dinner, and then we can think about having ice cream after. So you're not saying the no, you're not saying the don't or the stop, but you're presenting alternatives, because what you're doing is you're introducing flexible thinking and problem solving and impulse control, for that matter. Because you're saying, oh, I hear your request. I hear you. I'm understanding what you're saying. Let's think about it in this way. Or if you don't have any ice cream, or you don't want to give it to her, say, you're thinking of ice cream for dinner. I think that's a great idea. How about we have an ice cream night on Wednesday, but we got to plan it. So let's plan an entire menu, and we have to think about exactly what we want. Okay, I want to have popcorn, homemade popcorn, and pizza too. Do you want to, and then like engage her in a thought process, so that, again, like, yes, there are things that you want, but you don't always get immediately what you want. The things that you want, sometimes it's not appropriate. Sometimes we don't have the time, but we can think of ways to think flexibly and solve those problems. But a lot of how you diminish the intensity of tantrums and meltdowns is what you do before. You have to prepare the kid in terms of how to handle frustration, how to tolerate that, and what to do when they have those feelings. And then remember, it's normal. When it comes down to it, when they're 3, it's normal.
I think you just answered this question. What does letting the meltdown take its course look like, and what should parents do?
Well, I think it depends on each child. I mean, sometimes it can be a very physical tantrum. Sometimes it can be more verbal, or it could just be like a very refined tantrum where they're just like holding their breath, or just like silent treatment. You like literally just let it take its course. Like, you see it and you give words to it. Oh, you are really disappointed that you didn't get that red cup. You're really mad we didn't get to go to the pool. You're disappointed, whatever, like, you're stating what you think is happening. If they correct you, they correct you, but you state, because you're letting them know, I see you, I hear you, and you hold a boundary. If they hit you, you hold a boundary. I will not let you hit me. If they're trying to hurt themselves, I will not let you hurt yourself. I will not let you hit your brother. I will not let you hurt the dog. You can be angry, but you will not hurt yourself. You will not hurt other people. So you hold that boundary. You give them permission to feel what they feel. That's not okay to do. And then that's why preparing them in advance, in the future, when you feel upset, these are the things that you can do. You can stomp, you can scream, you can blow bubbles, you can jump on the trampoline. There's lots of things you can do, but I will not let you do these things that hurt yourself and hurt others.
My takeaway really quickly is regulate yourself, so then you can model those skills for them.
Yes.
And when we engage, nothing gets solved. This has been so very helpful. And I'm seeing so many positive comments from parents too. When someone is great on the Q&A, they become a favorite, and you are a favorite. That was excellent. Loved it. I'm going to be back at 7:00. And I know you're going to be back at 7:00, and I'm going to get to hear this all over again. And yes, I'm going to encourage you as well. Make a phone call and let someone else know, a partner, a friend, a relative. This is really key information. We can really make a difference, because it's not about us. It's about what's happening with them. Whether your child is 5 or 15, this is not about us.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Dr.
too.
Lockhart.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
All right. We'll see you 7 p.m. Central Time. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.
You too.